Well, average weekly earnings is close to $80,000 a year now, and in 2016-17, that'll probably be enough to put you in the second highest tax bracket if nothing is done to change those brackets.
Right.
But you need considerably more than that to qualify for a mortgage that allowed you to buy the median priced house in Sydney with a 20% deposit, and that's the conventionally used definition of housing affordability.
All right, so that $80,000 a year person can't do that.
No, and even if that person were a man and he had a spouse or partner who was earning average female weekly earnings, they, between them, would still be struggling to qualify for a mortgage to buy the average house price. I think the Treasurer was in effect admitting that you need to be earning considerably more than average weekly earnings in Sydney or Melbourne in order to be able to buy the median priced house these days.
Can we take it out of Sydney then and take it to Melbourne? What would you need to earn then in order to achieve the median house price in Melbourne?
Oh, I think you'd need something in excess of average weekly earnings in Melbourne as well, even if you were prepared to live in one of the outer suburbs and spend up to 2 hours in each direction commuting, which of course these days far few people are willing to do. One of the reasons why prices in Sydney in particular, and to a lesser extent Melbourne, are now as high relative to incomes as they are, is because Australians who are in a position to make this choice are willing to spend a higher proportion of their income on housing so that they spend a smaller proportion of their income on commuting than they'd have to if they lived in the outer suburbs. That's an unfortunate choice, and not everyone's in a position to make it.
Well, look, Bureau of Statistics figures show us that would-be owner-occupiers now account for less than half of the market, less than half of the money borrowed for home loans in April. That's the lowest proportion on record. So in your view, Saul Eslake, have investors pushed owner-occupiers out of the market?
Yes, I think they have. And when the Treasurer says, as he did yesterday, that housing's still affordable, it must be because people are still buying houses and apartments. That's obviously true. It's true by definition. But what's also true is that these days it's investors who are accounting for the majority of buying, and they are increasingly pushing up the price of housing. They can do that because they get their interest bills subsidised by other taxpayers courtesy of negative gearing. They only pay tax on their capital gains if they make them at half the rate that other taxpayers pay on their wage and salary incomes. They can afford to do that. Increasingly, first home buyers can't afford to do that. And the problem for them, I guess, is that in any given year, there are only going to be about 100,000 people who succeed in becoming first-time buyers, while at any point in time, there are over 8 million people who already own at least one property. There are 1.5 million people who own more than one, and their votes count for more with parties of both political persuasions than those who are struggling to buy their first home. That's why nothing changes.
So if the Treasury Secretary is right and there is a bubble in Sydney and possibly also in parts of Melbourne, maybe even elsewhere, how do you let the air out of that bubble? And do you agree with the Greens' proposal, which is to deny negative gearing tax deductions to new investors, leave it in place for those who have already, got their negative gearing situation set up, but stop it from here on in? Would that help?
Yes, it would, and that's something I've suggested myself, so I applaud the Greens for taking up that suggestion. I'm not sure that I would spend all of the revenue that would raise in the way that the Greens are suggesting. I'd rather it be applied to reducing the budget deficit or as part of a broader package of tax reform.
And just to jump in there, Saul, that would actually give you about $4 billion worth of savings, as I understand.
That's what the Parliamentary Budget Office has suggested, and I think their conclusions are probably right. It would be a useful contribution to funding a broader package of worthwhile tax reform. And as the Greens suggest, and I agree, it would also take some of the heat out of the housing market. I mean, what we don't want to see, of course, is falls in house prices of the sort that occurred in the United States, Ireland and Spain before, during and after the financial crisis. I mean, you could say if you wanted to, argue that America has solved the housing affordability problem that they had leading up to 2007, but the way they solved it is not a way that anyone else would sensibly want to emulate. The problem is, of course, that the further house prices keep escalating from their present inflated levels, especially now that we're beginning to see some significant amounts of new supply coming on, with over 200,000 dwellings likely to be commenced and completed this year. If we get a combination of rapidly rising prices and rapidly increasing supply, then our market will be more vulnerable to price declines when interest rates eventually rise than it has been probably since the late 1980s.
And just finally this morning then, and quickly, Saul Eslake, in your estimation and looking at the entire issue, were those comments from Treasurer Joe Hockey out of touch?
Oh, that's a political judgment which I don't want to make. The observation I would make is that it is increasingly difficult for first homeowners of modest to average means to become home buyers as they would wish to do, and I think that's a pity. That's why I say that rising house prices aren't doing any economic good anymore, and they're potentially doing some social harm.